Chapter 12, Worship and the Power of Group Prayer. In a small town in southern France, I was awakened early one morning by the compelling sound of cathedral bells. I had spent the night in a quaint hotel, a stopover on my motor tour of France. I looked out the window and observed scores of people silently walking along a winding lane toward the cathedral, undoubtedly to attend morning mass. Inspired by this evidence of devoutness, I quickly dressed and joined the pious pilgrims as we made our way to the cathedral. It was a memorable experience. Not so much the celebration of the Mass as just the sight of this large group of working people starting their workday with such deep commitment to the worship of their God. No matter what I may say iconoclastically about formal religion, I am deeply moved by the devoutness of the faithful. And yet, I always feel just a little sad, for it seems to me that so many people are reaching, searching, yearning for an experience of God that can only be found within themselves. The universe is calling, but they can only hear the cathedral bells calling them to come worship. The universe is calling us to awaken to oneness. The weary pilgrim journeys forth to church, to shrines, or to the meccas of the world in search of God. But you do not have to go to church or to any sacred place to get close to God. There is nowhere in all the world where you can get any closer to God than right where you are. God is present in his entirety within you, as much as in a great mystic, even Jesus. No one can be any closer to God than you, though they may be more aware of their oneness. Most persons think of prayer as just part of the experience of worship in church on the Sabbath. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, the fourth commandment established the institution of Sabbath day worship. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou labor, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work. Exodus 20, verses 8 and 9. In the early Hebrew culture, keeping the Sabbath was mandatory, and in their theocratic society, failure to comply with this commandment to the letter was a capital offense. Numbers chapter 15 cites the case of a man caught gathering sticks on the Sabbath, and he was taken outside the city and stoned to death, as the Lord commanded. An interesting commentary on the prevailing God concept. To understand the how of prayer, it is important to know how some of the traditional rigid practices have come about. Today, there is a professed concern about what Harvey Cox called the secular society. But it was institutional religion that created the division of sacred and secular, or holy days and weekdays. The church has become a place set apart, conducted by a clergy who are a class set apart on a Sabbath, which is a day set apart. And all of this is a gross misunderstanding of the wholeness of the universe, a total misreading of the universe calling. A modern religious commentator has said that the Christian is the least intelligent of all the great types of our race, because the typical Christian has taken the most profound and simple and workable formula ever presented to humanity and has made of it an umbrella for a rainy day, a nostrum for sickness, and a kind of soul insurance against disaster. Sabbath worship is curiously intermingled with the tradition of the Day of Atonement, which goes back into the early customs of primitive creatures. They tried to wash away their sins and to make appeasement to the gods, usually with a blood sacrifice, which, as we have seen in early cultures, was the sacrifice of human life. In time, as people became more sophisticated, blood sacrifices were omitted, but it was still a time of atonement or washing away of sins. The early Christian theologians, centuries after the fact, gave this primitive belief new life in the concept of the vicarious atonement. It is a hideous doctrine in the religion about Jesus that has nothing at all to do with the religion of Jesus. According to this strange tenet, God sought to save the world by sacrificing his own Son on the altar as a sacrificial lamb, thus vicariously freeing all persons from sin if they accept Jesus and his blood offering. This has been one of the major misrepresentations by the Christian tradition. Sin has been presented as an affront to God. We have taught our children that we offend God when we sin, and that we have to appease and placate Him for remission of our sins. But you can't offend God. God knows nothing of sin. Thou art of purer eyes than to behold evil. Sin is simply the perversion in our consciousness, a frustration of our God potential. The only absolution for sin is the realization of oneness, at one-ment with God. But this is not simply a worship service or a special holy day. It is an awakening of consciousness on any day. The practice of religion is a subtle attempt at appeasement and reconciliation. How easy it is to go through a ritual on Sunday and then put it all back into the 6-day closet of unconcern. The word Sabbath, from the Hebrew word Shabbat, means intermission. It is not a special day, but a special discipline of consciousness on any day. It is important to have frequent silent parentheses or quiet times of inner prayer at intervals during the involvements of every day. God doesn't have anything special to give you on Sunday that He doesn't give you on Friday or Tuesday. The blood pumps the same on Thursday as it does on Sunday. You have the same blood pressure and the same surging of life through your system, the same renewal of cells every day of the week. The activity of God is always functioning because you are a spiritual being. You are a child of the universe, which is calling relentlessly, seeking to give you the kingdom. Lest I be misunderstood, may I say that I believe in the great good that can come through making a church-going habit. A few important advantages of such a habit are that you make a periodically renewed commitment to the creative intermission, and that you send your mind to school to be stimulated by concepts designed to help you to know yourself and to progressively release your imprisoned splendor. But there is something more, an opportunity to be part of a buildup of spiritual power to which you can give and from which you can receive, and in the process, to be part of a radiance of light into the world. The word worship is one of the least understood words of Western religious practice. It has normally implied a glittering spectacle in which the congregants are merely spectators, and the communion with God is done for people by professionals. Actually, the word worship antedates the Bible. In pre-biblical times, the people prostrated themselves before various idols in fear of self-abasement. The word worship in the Hebrew means to lick at the heels like a dog. We have retained this idea in the bowing of the head in prayer, which should have no place in the prayer practice of one who has heard the universe calling. The word prayer, from the ancient Sanskrit root palal, means judging oneself to be wondrously made. The practice of prayer should lead us to lift up our eyes and know that if we are worthy to draw breath, we are worthy of the fullness of life. For we need a renewed sense of self-worth. This is why I have coined the word worthship as an identification of our Sunday experiences. Thus, the service is not a performance we put on for God's benefit, but a workshop in which we work for an expanded sense of self-worth. We must stop thinking of ourselves as miserable sinners and begin accepting ourselves as God's own. The universe is calling us to hold our heads high and be all that we can be. We have sung, "How great thou art," but God isn't moved by our flattery. We need to know how great I am, emphasizing the infinite potential that is ours to release. Of course, we have to act out our greatness in love and peace in all relationships, and in keeping our mind and heart in tune with God. As Jesus said, "If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them." John 13, verse 17. There is a lovely old hymn, "Take time to be holy." This is often made to imply, take time to be pious. Go to church, Get down on your knees. Carry a Bible under your arm. Actually, the word holy means whole, oneness. Take time to become established in the awareness of oneness. The benefits are great. Increased ability to make decisions, to unfold creative ideas, to rise above the challenges of human relations, to improve both your disposition and your health. In the marketplace of life, peace and equanimity may seem elusive, even unattainable, but they come easily to the mind that is disciplined to an experience of silence or inner prayer. Today, there is an increasing interest in prayer groups, growth groups, support groups. It is interesting to note that this is where the Christian church began. The word church comes from the Greek ecclesia, which literally means called out ones. The early Christian movement was an activity within Judaism. It involved enlightened Jews who were into new insights of spiritual awareness. They had heard the universe calling them out of orthodoxy into an esoteric involvement with spiritual law, in a process that tells much about human consciousness. As the generations passed, the ecclesia became an ecclesiastical development of the churches and a uniform church liturgy. And in ecclesiastolatry, which means worship of the church, a great effort was made to justify the gaudy religious edifices and the glittering spectacles of liturgical celebration within them as being a system that was specifically founded by Jesus. But a careful study of Christian history reveals that this in no way was the intention of Jesus or of Paul or of any of the leaders of first century Christianity. Thus, Christianity began as a movement within Judaism, similar to the contemporary healing movement within Protestantism. It was composed of small groups, or ecclesia, who met together in group prayer and in discussion of the spiritual laws revealed by Jesus. They had no buildings and no priest or minister. It is clear that they were all faithful Jews and not religious renegades, for Paul clearly says that they went regularly into the temple to pray. These little bands of followers met in homes and out in the sides of hills. One of the group was chosen to be the facilitator. This is where the word minister began. In the beginning, it had nothing whatever to do with being ordained by God. Paul, the organizer of this growing movement, selected the leader, saying, "I ordain you," but it simply means, "I appoint you." From this humble beginning have evolved vast ecclesiastical machines with form and ritual and robed priests and elaborate ceremonies and altars and candles. We are given the strong suggestion that God is to be found in the church. Much as I noted in that small French town, multitudes of people go to church to find or experience God. Much as I noted in that small French town, multitudes of people go to church to find or experience God. But you can only experience God in yourself. God is no more present in a cathedral than in a movie theater. When you are in a sanctuary of prayer, God is present for you because you are present. Now, does this mean that there is a greater concentration of God in the sanctuary when a throng of people is gathered there? In other words, is there more prayer power in a prayer group than with one praying alone? Remember, the whole of God is present at every point in space. God cannot be more present anywhere than he is present everywhere. And yet, there is something very special about a group, large or small. If the members of the group come with a common bond of interest, from that bonding emerges a group soul. Jesus said, "For where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there am I in the midst of them." Matthew 18, verse 20. This is mistakenly interpreted to mean Jesus is in the midst of the group. This is one of the cases where Jesus is speaking in the absolute, referring to the transcendent awareness of the I Am. The great power of a church congregation or a small prayer group is not the music and sermons of the service or the words exchanged in the group, but rather in a mystical process that I call the power of the swarm. When a group, large or small, comes together in a commitment of spiritual union or communion, that group becomes a group soul, a consciousness to which each person gives and from which each one receives. The soul has its needs, and at the same time it contains the answer to its needs, which include all the needs of the people involved. People often say to me after a worship service that included a lesson or lecture on truth, "How did you know my need? You are talking right to me." It is the group process at work, and in the small prayer group, when we achieve a group consciousness of unity, certain members of the group will become agents for the expression of just the right answers to another's needs. To understand the group power of the swarm, think for a minute of a swarm of bees, a school of fish, or a large flight of starlings. The individual entities, in some mysterious way, become locked into the whole body. A transcendent force seems to take over, controlling and guiding the whole body, creating patterns of motion so complex that they seem to have been choreographed from above. Flocks of birds and schools of fish have a distinctive style of behavior, with a fluidity and a seeming intelligence that transcends the abilities of their members. The vast flight of starlings is capable of turning en masse, avoiding collisions within the flock without any one leader. Fish, too, their vision limited in murky water, manage complex, seemingly instantaneous maneuvers when alarmed by an intruder. In the prayer group of large worship service, if there is a willingness to swarm, to let go of self and its ego needs, and give oneself over to the large good of the group, there is a tremendous potential for power. Required are love, humility, and commitment to the greater good of all. If you give yourself lovingly to the group and trust the process, you will receive a great blessing. I am often asked, what about Holy Communion? Do you have communion services? My response, every time we pray, we have communion. Taking communion to many people means taking your place in the grandstand. There is no automatic communion for the spectator. You have to get in the game and experience a first-hand and immediate experience of God. No one can do your praying for you. You can only move to your own center. Meister Eckhart shows this clear insight when he suggests you should dip into your own treasure, for you carry all reality and essence within yourself. But having said that, there is a great power in group prayer. When people in a group can really let go their ego and humbly let themselves merge into the group energy, there can be a buildup of that energy to a dramatic point. The prayer of the group can't heal anyone or change anyone's life, but it can become a pool of light, which may be radiated out to include specific persons or general situations in the world. A prayer group can be effective if it meets frequently to experience a bonding. The ideal size is 10 to 12 persons. If it includes more than this, it becomes difficult to effect as swarming and thus to establish the group soul. At the start of each session, it is helpful to take 10 minutes to interact in fellowship and love. This is to renew an awareness of the bonding of the group soul. Then, most prayer groups will have a time for discussion and exchange of ideas. It is helpful if it is based on the study of an inspirational book. The text gives a frame of reference within which the sharing time will function. If the purpose of the group is the study of truth, then the larger portion of the time will be given over to the study and discussion of truth. If it is essentially a prayer group, it is still good to have some input from a book or a brief talk by one of the group. This, too, sets a kind of boundary line within which to function. At the beginning of the prayer portion of the session, it is well to remind the group that they should not sympathetically react to problems of pain. They might decide in advance if affirmations or treatments will be voiced by the group in unison or by an individual, or if it is to be a Quaker-type session where they sit in silence until someone is moved to speak a word of prayer. When the format is agreed upon, The facilitator calls for stillness, and everyone is instructed to go down their own well, to make their own contact with divine flow. The mistake is often made of plunging into a group prayer without taking time for each person to touch the secret spring in his or her own heart. If any participants do not make their own contact, they simply get in the grandstand and become spectators, and they become weak links in the circle. After a designated period of individual communion, at the direction of the facilitator, attention is called to joining together as a group dynamo, which can, if the group wishes, be symbolized by the joining of hands around the circle. And now, by the power of the swarm, the group will function as one body. At this point, the facilitator may introduce names of persons or situations to which to direct the group prayer energy. The first step is to heal the concern. An excellent approach is to have the people visualize the people or conditions on the prayer agenda in the center of the circle, so that the group can symbolize the hands of the universe reaching out in support. And the voiced affirmations or treatments can be as the universe calling for all persons to come up higher to the greater good that is the Father's good pleasure to give. The important thing is to know that it is not I, but the Father. As a group, project the light and power to anything that concerns you. And remember, you are not praying to God. You are each one opening yourself to the divine flow. And then, as a group, you become focused on the power of God, blessing those in the center of the circle, and reaching out in a blessing of peace and love to all the world. Now, to sum up, when you attend a church service or a Sunday lecture, and you owe it to yourself to do so often, in your mind, make a transposition to a service of creative worship. Predetermine that you will find a renewed awareness of who you really are, a whole and complete child of God. Enter the experience, not looking to find God, but confidently bringing God with you. And in the opening prayer of the service, whatever the words, you go within and call to remembrance your own unique oneness with the creative flow, so that you will not be a mere spectator in the grandstand, but an active participant with your own resources to give. Approach your Sabbath experience in this way, and you will always receive a great blessing for being there. And it will be more than a receiving. It will be a giving way to your own imprisoned splendor. And, idealistic as it sounds, the world will be a better place because you went to church that day.